Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Veg Fest. Like I said, the very first ever, at least that I've ever participated in. This event is brought to you by Tampa Bay Veg Fest, Central Florida Veg Fest, and Solutionary Species. Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. My name is Kevin, and I will be your host for the entire weekend. Tonight, Saturday, and Sunday, we have 3 awesome webinars, and they're going to be highly educational. Starting tonight with Christopher Sebastian, he'll be sharing with us fact-checking animal rights media. Christopher is an author, a researcher, and a lecturer, and he's the director of social media for Peace Advocacy Network. He also sits on the advisory council for Encompass, and Chris is also a senior fellow at Sentient Media and is also the co-founder of VGN. He lectures at Columbia University in the Department of Social Work for the graduate course POP, which stands for Power, Oppression, and Privilege, using a multidisciplinary approach that includes media theory, political science, and social psychology. He focuses on how human relationships with other animals shapes our attitudes about race, sexuality, and class. So, everybody joining us, please give Christopher Sebastian a huge virtual round of applause and enjoy his presentation. Thank you so much. Take it away, Chris.
Hey, thank you so much, Kevin.
My pleasure.
And thank you to all of you who are attending. I really appreciate you all being here, taking some time out of your Friday night to spend with us. And like Kevin said, like my background is primarily in journalism. And to that end, I inject a lot of my journalism work into my animal rights advocacy. So one of the things that I had noticed is that the media landscape for vegans and for veganism is it's sometimes not great. And especially right now, because we're living in a time where misinformation and disinformation actually impacts a lot of the social media landscape in particular. And a lot of the information that we consume is it's not the most intellectually nutritious, if that makes sense. So I put together this presentation for Sentient Media because I am a senior fellow there. I do a lot of writing for Sentient Media. And if you haven't liked them on social media, definitely find their Facebook page, Instagram, and Twitter. And follow them. They do an awful lot of animal rights journalism. But to that end, I put this together primarily for some of the other authors and journalists for Sentient Media, so that they had a better understanding of fact checking and of the misinformation landscape that exists online, and how we can actually use our resources to use better discernment when it comes to the things that we read and the things that we actually share on social media as well. Because at any given time, regardless of whether you're in journalism or not, you need to be aware of the type of information that you are consuming or putting out there, because we are all, regardless of whether we realize it or not, we are all participating in this landscape as media consumers, as content creators, and as distributors. Every time you post something on social media, you're a distributor. Every time you reshare something, you're distributing it. Every time you come up with an original post, you're a content creator. And all the time, whenever you're scrolling around on social media, regardless of whether it is YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, whatever, you are a social media or media consumer. So it's really, really important that all of us, regardless of where we are in this landscape, whether we are employed in journalism or whether we're just surfing around on the internet, have this knowledge. And we are really responsible with the type of information that we're putting out there and that we're taking in ourselves. So to that end, I'm going to share my screen now and we're going to get started. Share my screen, make sure that nothing inappropriate is on there. And let us jump right into the presentation. Animal rights media and information disorder. Let's start from the first slide. And there we go. Looks great, comes up on the screen, fantastic. I'm actually gonna turn off my camera so that you all are paying attention to the presentation. Ordinarily, I like to have polls that come up periodically throughout the presentation, just to make sure that you all haven't fallen asleep and to make sure that you're paying attention, but we don't have polls on this one. So it's gonna be slightly less interactive than I promised you, but I hope that you're gonna have a good time anyway. I think you will. Animal rights media and information disorder. Before we get started, or as we get started, I definitely want to make sure that everyone is aware of a few really important terms. types of information disorder. You've got misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So you've got this Venn diagram, which I'm a huge fan of Venn diagrams. And on the far left, you've got misinformation, and on the far right, you've got malinformation, and in between, you've got disinformation. Misinformation is characterized by unintentional mistakes, such as inaccurate photo captions, dates, statistics, translations, or when satire is taken seriously. How many times have we read satire online and we got all bent out of shape because we thought that it was real? I can raise my hand to that one because it's happened to me before. Malinformation, on the far right side, deliberate publication of private information for personal or corporate rather than public interest, such as revenge porn, or a deliberate change of context, date, or time of genuine content. So malinformation is characterized by the intent to harm. Disinformation is in between. It's fabricated or deliberately manipulated audio or visual content, intentionally created conspiracy theories or rumors. So it can fall right in the middle of that spectrum. Other terms that I want us to be familiar with are fact checking and verification. Now, I have actually worked probably for the past 10 years as a technical writer and as a copy editor, and a huge chunk of my work is actually doing both fact checking and verification. A lot of people actually get those terms confused because they think that they mean the same thing. They don't. There's a lot of overlap. And if you look at this Venn diagram, which actually looks an awful lot like the MasterCard logo, you see that fact checking on the far left relies on information from experts, academia, or government agencies, and results in adjudicated conclusions, or excuse me, results in an adjudicated conclusion on a claim's veracity. Verification is similar, but it's different. It seeks primary evidence from eyewitnesses, geolocation, reverse image search, and it results in a story being published or stopped. Usually verification happens before a story is published. And in between, both of them are all about debunking fake news and viral hoaxes. So that's where the overlap actually is. Now remember, again, this is going to come up later on in the presentation, fact checking relies on information from experts, academia, or government agencies and results in an adjudicated conclusion on a claim's veracity. Verification seeks primary evidence from eyewitnesses, geolocation, reverse image search, etc. So now I want you all to be familiar with the psychology of misinformation, what it actually does to our mind when we consume it. We're going to get to the animal rights portion like very soon. But again, this is just like a little primer for those of you who are unfamiliar with all of these things and how they operate in the background or in our subconsciouses. Repetition causes misinformation to embed in people's minds, and it makes it much harder to correct. There are a couple of reasons for this. First, if you hear a statement more than once, you're more likely to believe that it's true. Repetition can cause, can also make a belief seem more widespread than it is, which can increase its plausibility, leading people to the false conclusion that if many people think it's true, then there's a good chance that it is. What's an example of repetition? I'll tell you. Like, how many times, like, if I were in a classroom setting, I would tell you to raise your hand, but just raise your hand virtually, or just think about raising your hand because I can't see you anyway. But like, how many times have you heard people say, oh, cows just give milk. They just make milk. It's a thing that cows do. Obviously, this is biologically absurd to believe, but somehow, even though most of us have passed 7th grade biology, we've just like largely collectively accepted that cows are just magical milk giving machines. Why? Because repetition. We've heard it a whole bunch of times, and so we just kind of assume that it's true. Now, because most of you are probably not familiar with how I do presentations. And like I promised you interactivity that actually can't happen in the same way. I want you all to feel completely free to participate in the comments and like, jump into the chat, like say amen, whatever, like, if you're feeling it, or if you have other examples of something that we're talking about at a given time, chat messages are just going to come up. That usually happens in my presentations. And it lets me know that like people are like, if you're having conversations amongst yourselves, I don't mind. I'm not the kind of teacher that doesn't want you to actually like, talk to other students in the class. I couldn't stop you from doing it anyway. So like send your surreptitious text messages back and forth to one another. And also to me, if you think that I'm ugly, or you think that I'm lying, or if I spelled something wrong in the presentation, let me know. I want to hear about it, or let other people know. But yeah, like repetition, this is just an example of the types of things that like, that people will say, or because it was repeated a whole bunch of times, we've just all decided that it's true because it has increased its plausibility due to the number of people who have said it over and over again. And that's what makes it take root in our minds. So what's another effect of misinformation on our psyche? The continued influence effect. The continued influence often occurs when misinformation, even when explained in the context of a debunk, can later be recalled as fact. In short, it is the failure of corrections, sometimes called belief echoes. This is the most important psychological concept to understand when it comes to corrections. How many times have you actually tried to debunk something with someone, but you've actually used the thing in that you were trying to debunk in in the sentence? What you want to do is actually avoid doing that, because if you repeat it, then once again, just like with repetition, it actually continues to have an influence. So even when you repeat something, even in the context of trying to debunk it, try to avoid doing that. Try to avoid actually repeating the thing that you are trying to debunk when you're discussing it with another person. It takes the power away from it a whole lot. So that happens very frequently. The tainted truth effect. This is where corrections make people start to doubt other true information. This is, for me, this is actually the most dangerous. The risk that corrections and warnings create generalized distrust of what people read from sources such as the media. Also known as the spillover effect, the tainted truth effect is a potential problem with the labeling misinformation on social media. It can make people start to doubt everything they see online. What's an example of this? If you follow the news or if you follow the media, I don't know how many of you actually follow American politics, or if you're even in the United States yourselves. I know a couple of you are not. But if you've been following American politics, there was a really huge social media dust up recently because Donald Trump was actually putting misinformation about mail-in ballots on when it comes to elections, mail-in ballots or absentee ballots, he was saying actually increase the chances of voter fraud. That's absolutely untrue. And so what did Twitter do when Donald Trump started posting this misinformation online? They actually, instead of taking it down, put an advisory on it. They fact checked his tweet in real time so that it had an advisory on this saying this is untrue, but they left the tweet there. And so with the spillover effect, with the tainted truth effect, they've labeled this misinformation, but they left it there. And this actually has an adverse effect on people's psyche because it's still there. And what it does is it breeds mistrust in people's minds. It creates this unhealthy amount of skepticism. Skepticism is not inherently unhealthy, but it creates an unhealthy amount of skepticism in people's minds. And it makes us just doubt everything that we see. And so when we start to doubt reality, that's when people are able to start participating more and more in things like conspiracy theories, vaccines cause autism and the earth is flat and climate change isn't real. We just don't know. I may be sitting at a table, or maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm just a potted plant. Who knows what's true anymore? That's actually the greater danger that's at play with when you leave misinformation up online and just try to label it as incorrect. That's something that unfortunately happens. And so we see that all the time. How many times have people posted something on social media? We point out to that's not true. What you posted is absolutely not true. And so somebody will say, oh, you know what? Yeah, maybe that isn't true, but I'm just going to leave this up anyway. And so what you can see in the comment section or in the conversation, that this isn't true information, but someone has actually left it up. And so therefore people start to doubt everything that they read online. And so that's when you have people saying things oh, you know what? Eggs are healthy this week and eggs are not healthy next week. And so how many times have you talked to somebody and tried to have a conversation with them about a plant-based diet, and they're like, well, everything causes cancer. No one knows what's true. Just follow your heart and believe whatever. And and may God be with you. Best of luck. Some people are going to eat hamburgers and some people are going to eat something else. Oranges cause cancer. No one knows what's nutrition anymore. What even is food? So that's something that absolutely happens. Again, a lot of these things apply to veganism or to animal rights advocacy. We don't think of it as having crossover. So many of us, we live in these sort of single issue bubbles where we think that there's no this exists in its own little vacuum, and that veganism isn't influenced by things like politics, by media, by by capitalism, by economics, and it absolutely is. And we need to be aware of all of these other influencing factors that that affect our decision-making processes, especially when it pertains to things like justice for other animals and for ourselves. So we can't approach these things in isolation, and it's really, really important that we understand these really key concepts when it comes to our media consumption and and how it affects our decision making and the decision making of the people that we are ourselves trying to influence. So again, those are the things that I want you all to understand about the psychology of misinformation. But now we want to talk about the difference between facts and truth. Again, two things that have a lot of overlap, but actually can sometimes be very, very different. Facts are indisputable. Truth is acceptable. That's a quote that I pulled from online. I thought it was really interesting. I also stole this from online. This is from Larry Walsh. In 2018, I decided not to reinvent the wheel. I just decided that Larry said it better than I could. A fact is something that's indisputable based on empirical research and quantifiable measures. Facts go beyond theories. They're proven through calculation and experience, or there's something that definitely occurred in the past, like the Second World War. That's something that definitely occurred in the past. Some people may try to rewrite history, but we can't do that. That is absolutely a fact. We did have one world war, and then we turned right around and had another world war because we're bananas. I don't know. Truth, however, is entirely different. It may include fact, but it can also include belief. Oftentimes, people will accept things as true because they fall closer to their comfort zones, are assimilated easily into their comfort zones, or reflect their preconceived notions of reality. How many times have you had a conversation with someone about, say, I don't know, something as sensitive as racial injustice? My lived experience as a Black person can include factual evidence about the number of Black people that are incarcerated, the number of Black people who experience harsher sentencing, that have worse economic incomes. Those are all facts that are actually statistically proven to be true. That is imperial evidence, and those are quantifiable measures that back up my feelings. Black lives absolutely matter. That is truth, because that's part of my lived experience. That's part of my true experiences as a Black person who experiences racial racial disenfranchisement in these United States that that I'm from. So yeah, those are facts that I use in my truth. My experiences as a Black person are part of my truth, but there are a lot of non-Black people out there who actually disagree with my truth. And this is where discussions actually start to break down. We can use facts to actually back up our truth, but facts and truth are not always exactly the same thing. And when we apply this to an animal rights situation, we use actual facts to back up the truth. The truth is that animal liberation is something that is entirely necessary to have happen. The truth is that animals actually experience bigotry and discrimination and disenfranchisement and enslavement in our in our systems, in our human-centered systems. That is that's absolute truth. And we use facts to back this up. Are other animals forcibly impregnated? Are they are they held against their will? Are they enslaved by our systems? Are their lands encroached upon? All of these things are actual facts. We use factual evidence to back up our truth. But those two things are not always they can sometimes, they're not always mutually exclusive. Excuse me. So yeah, facts and truth actually they share overlap, but they're not exactly the same thing. Let us actually use a real world example of this. This is the article that I actually used in in the synopsis for this presentation. I'm sure some of you have probably seen this before. It's been floating around the internet, as you can see here from the byline. This was published originally Tuesday, December 15th of 2015. So this is an article that's 5 years old. And people absolutely drag this up time and time again and use it as evidence against vegans and veganism. And they always qualify it with the sorry vegans, which I never understand what they're apologizing for. But this is a primary example of facts and truth and how the two can be abused to suit certain agendas. Now, before we actually go, go and take a deep dive into this article, we're going to talk a little bit later on about evaluating sources. But before we begin, let's evaluate this source. Where's it coming from? This is from The Independent. The Independent is a reputable newspaper. It's a UK newspaper. It's got a really great rating from Media Bias Fact Check. It is a real, it's a real and useful source. And of course, it's got an extremely regrettable headline: lettuce is 3 times worse than bacon for emissions, and vegetarian diets could be bad for the environment. So that's a super yikes. But it's coming from The Independent. What else can we tell about this just by looking at at the byline? It's got an author, Adam Withnall. And Adam actually has a Twitter handle, so we can look this person up. We can see whether or not he is a reputable journalist. He is. We know where this information is coming from. We know who wrote this article, and we can check the date and we can see when it was written. So this article is 5 years old, 5 or 6. 5 years is right around the cutoff for what I would call reliable scientific information, because things like this can change very rapidly. So we've evaluated the source. This is actually a reasonable source, even though it's got a garbage headline, and the author clearly has an anti-vegan agenda. So let's dig into the article and see what it actually has to say. According to new research from Carnegie Mellon University, following the USDA recommendations to consume more fruits, vegetables, dairy, and seafood is more harmful to the environment because those foods have relatively high resource uses and greenhouse gas emissions per calorie. Eating lettuce is over 3 times worse in greenhouse gas emissions than eating bacon, says Paul Fishbeck, professor of social and decisions, yada, 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 yada. Lots of common vegetables require more resources per calorie than you would think. Eggplant, celery, and cucumbers look particularly bad when compared to pork or chicken. Now, this is coming from where? Carnegie Mellon University. That is a pretty, that's a pretty high profile university, puts out a lot of factual information. And they're using facts to actually back up this article. So, how do we dispute this? This is this is factual. But then you actually look at an article from grist.org. And this is really important. This is really important because they actually explain why or how these facts actually don't relate to real and measurable truth. This is a quote from Brent Kim from Johns Hopkins Center. Researchers from that study at Carnegie Mellon compared the foods calorie for calorie, which can be misleading. It is absurd to compare the environmental impacts between bacon and lettuce when you're using calories as the denominator. A serving of lettuce has fewer calories than a stick of gum. How many pieces of bacon are you going to put away? You can put away a whole pack of bacon. And you're going to have an astronomical number of calories. To match the number of calories that you would be able to consume in an entire packet of bacon, you would have to eat a freak ton of lettuce. I almost said the F word there. I probably shouldn't. I wasn't invited to by the organizers of this event. I probably should have checked them in advance. So I got to keep my F words in check. So you need 93 cups of shredded lettuce to equal the caloric equivalent of 4 slices of bacon. That's how much lettuce you would have to consume. So to use calories as the denominator in this equation is completely ludicrous, because nobody is going to sit and eat 93 cups of bacon, but people will probably blow through 4 slices of bacon before you can before I get to the end of the sentence. So did they actually use factual information? Absolutely. Is that information true? Definitely not. Definitely not. And this is what we mean when we're talking about the difference between facts and truth. And we need to be armed with this information when we enter into discussions with people, because people are going to absolutely positively try to twist facts every single time. When people talk about food deserts and introduce this into conversations, are food deserts real? You better believe it. Do they contribute to the disenfranchisement of poor people? And are they important to talk about in terms of food justice and food apartheid and food inequality? Absolutely, definitely. Are the existence of food deserts an argument against veganism or against animal liberation? You better bleeping believe not. Absolutely not. Because these two, while they are adjacent issues, are not synonymous issues with one another. But people will absolutely use and abuse facts and twist the truth. and like in an attempt to like minimize or to disregard or diminish in many ways the importance and necessity of animal liberation. Ooh, I'm seeing people sharing articles and everything in the chat. I'm so happy about that. When people get into the chat, I'm really stoked. You're getting into the presentation and you're actually digging up your own links and your own articles. So like I'm super proud of you because you're citing sources, and that like nothing makes me happier. It really gets me going. So here we are. Like the next part that we're going to talk about is like quotes, because how many times have we seen memes floating around the internet? But we have to be really, really wary of the memes that we see online and the memes that we share ourselves, because we always say things that people said and people didn't actually say them. So like, let's talk about Gandhi as a primary example, because we've seen this quote many, many times before. This one, like, you know, was shared actually very recently by PETA. And it says, in his total commitment to nonviolence, Gandhi has always included the animals, stating, and this is the meme that you see floating around all the time, the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. Isn't that a profound quote that Gandhi never said? Gandhi did not actually say that. We see it all the time. We think that he said it because we see his image and we see the word superimposed on some image of him sitting with a butterfly, or there's like a bucolic sunset behind him, or a halo over his head, whatever have you. And like, you know, and Gandhi said these things, and Gandhi didn't actually say that. Let's think about, like, let's actually find out what Gandhi actually did say about other animals. This is a real quote from Gandhi. Gandhi said, "It is a sin. It should be a sin to feed stray dogs, and we should save numerous dogs if we had legislation making every stray dog liable to be shot. Um, Even if those who feed stray dogs consented to pay a penalty for their misdirected compassion, we should be free from the curse of stray dogs." Gandhi actually said that. Holy sugar honey iced tea. Wow, like that's bananas. There should be no stray dogs, even as we have no stray cattle. But can we take individual charge of these roving dogs? Can we have a pin hold for them? If both these things are impossible, then there seems to me no alternative except to kill them. That's what Gandhi actually said about stray dogs. So how do you reconcile these two statements? The first statement, Gandhi didn't actually say, but we think that he said it. How do I know that like Gandhi did actually say this one? Because it was taken directly from a letter that actually exists in a museum, a letter that Gandhi actually wrote that's signed by him. So we have actual evidence that shows that Gandhi actually he said this thing. It doesn't mean that Gandhi's a bad person, at least not because he said this, or like, you know, like there are plenty of other reasons why Gandhi is a bad person, because his anti-blackness absolutely comes to mind. But like, you know, and like, yeah, like we can say that like maybe Gandhi has like, you know, some great opinions about animals that exist in other spaces, but he absolutely did not say that quote, but we just believe that he did. What did Gandhi actually say about stray dogs? Let's find out. Excuse me, what did Gandhi actually say? What was the real quote that he had made? The real quote that Gandhi did make was, "The true measure of any society can be found in it, how it treats its most vulnerable members." And I would suspect, I have no like evidence to back this up, but I would suspect that the reason that this like got changed is because someone who strongly believes in animal rights and in animal rights messaging probably at some point interpreted a society's most vulnerable members to be other animals, and they had inserted that into the quote. Mistakenly, probably. I would like to like, oh no, I'm so sorry, I ruined someone's favorite T-shirt. But, like, you know, like I don't want to assume the worst of people. Like, you know what, I like to enter into conversations believing the best, or just assuming the best of people. So I don't think that there was any like ill intention. I think that it was just a misinterpretation of Gandhi's words. And once it like gets out there on the internet, there's no taking it back. Like Mark Twain said, like, you know, a truth, or excuse me, like a lie can like, you know, cross the world 4 times while the truth is still putting on its boots, or something to that effect. Maybe Gandhi said it, maybe Mark Twain said it, I don't know, maybe it was Cardi B, but it's definitely a quote that's out there and it's absolutely real. Like, you know, like a lie can really travel much farther than the truth, and in record time. And so now we have this like this mistaken belief that Gandhi said something that he absolutely did not say, and there's no catching it, like there's no correcting it. I know somebody actually taken this this talk, this presentation, several months ago, and they tried to correct somebody on the internet. But because of the psychology of misinformation, like, you know what, like, it's very difficult to correct misinformation once it takes root, because our brains reject it. Our brains reject new information that makes us feel uncomfortable. This is part of the reason why so many people get their backs up. They get very, very angry or anxious when we talk to them about animal abuse and animal exploitation, because the misinformation that we already have existing in our brains about animals, like, you know, that's being threatened. And this information, once it's in our brain, does not like direct threats. It doesn't like those things. And so it rejects that. And so even though this person who had taken my lecture tried to correct someone, and the misinformation that they were spreading about Gandhi, like, you know, they didn't really like that. It is indeed cognitive dissonance. Thank you, Charlie, for putting that out there. It's real. And even if we are animal rights allies and advocates, we're still susceptible to it, because all of us are susceptible to these cognitive vulnerabilities. We just have to be aware of them and try to fight back against them whenever we can. And we can do it because we've done it one time. That's how we became vegan in the first place. So let's just continue with this. Here's another, here's another quote. This is actually where I would actually introduce a poll into the conversation. And it would, but we can't do a poll right now, so I'm just going to ask you outright. This quote actually comes to us from Michelle Obama. She says the measure of any society is how it treats its women and girls. And this is obviously a play on Gandhi's quote, talking about the most vulnerable members of our society. In this instance, Michelle Obama interprets the most vulnerable members of our society to be women and girls. So in the poll, I would ask you, does this quote require a fact check, or does it require verification? And I would give you two options. Now, because we can't do a poll, I am going to ask you all to just put into the chat, does it require fact checking or verification? And I'll give you all a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds to think about this. Now, remember what we said before about fact checking and verification. Fact check requires us to go to an academic, a government official, an expert, and ask them, once we have learned this information, we're going to adjudicate the veracity of a claim that's being made. Now, verification, on the other hand, requires us to perform geolocation, a reverse image search, find first-person accounts, witnesses, people that were there at the scene. So that's verification versus fact-checking. Now, I see a lot of people actually said fact-check, and I see one person who actually said verification, and the winner is, ding, 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 verification. Oh, we want to change our answer. It's too late for that. And because we can't do anonymous polls, all of the answers are captured for time immemorial in the chat. Now, why is this verification? Does anybody want to take a guess? Now, remember, verification, fact-checking, I'll tell you why it's not fact-checking. Because remember, fact-checking requires us to, to go to an expert, a government official, a politician, or an academic, and to adjudicate the veracity of a claim. Is Michelle Obama making a claim here? She's not making a claim. Now, I can see why people would think that this was a fact check, because Michelle Obama is a political figure. But there wasn't an actual claim being made. This is a quote from Michelle Obama, and we are verifying whether or not she said it. How do we verify this? You know what? We've got we've got a date for this. It's October 13th of 2016. So we know what date it was. Will we be able to find for people who were at that event? Will we be able to find video of that event? Will we be able to find her saying this on video? So we would have witnesses. We would be able to perform a reverse image search. We would be able to go to this event on October 13th. Where was she on October 13th? What speech was she giving when she said this? Where we can track this down. And we're verifying whether or not she actually said it. So this is a verification. That was a verification. So thanks for everybody for participating. That was a good one. That was a good one. Moving right along, we're going to do another one. You didn't know that we were going to do these back to back, did you? So this one, actually, I've got two quotes here from the Dr. Martin Luther King. Now, these two quotes show up on the internet all the time. You've got the one in the upper left. One day, the absurdity of the almost universal human belief in the slavery of other animals will be palpable. We shall then have discovered our souls and become worthier of sharing this planet with them. That's from the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King. And in the lower right, never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way. Pop quiz. Which one of these MLK quotes is real? Is it the upper left? One day the absurdity of the almost universal human belief in the slavery of other animals will be palpable? Or is it the lower right? Never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Which one of these MLK quotes actually happened? You all thinking about it. I see a lot of answers coming in. We got top, we got bottom, we got upper left, we got lower right. We have like, we've got hill and dale, black and white. Oh my God, decisions. Like if this was an actual poll and we were voting, I would tell you all to vote like it was a 2020 presidential election, and the Republicans were not actually suppressing the vote as violently as they are, and there is no Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court. I'm going to give you the answer now. Like, there are loads of people who have voted. The answer is neither one of them are correct. Both of them are completely false. I tricked you. Never trust the big button and smile. I lied. And I am so sneaky, I know, right? Both of these are false. Like, there was a meta-analysis done of like all of Dr. King's speeches and all of his public appearances and interviews that he's given and all of the things that he's written. He never said either one of these. When I have given this presentation before, a lot more people are actually predisposed to believe that it was the lower right one that was correct. And why? Because he's appearing in a photo with a German Shepherd that like is either really, really close to him, or he appears to be kissing on the forehead next to his eye. And so, when you actually see him in, I know I'm super undermining your trust. I'm I told you, never trust a big button to smile. But yeah, you actually see him in an image with an animal. And so, that already primes your mind to believe something about that quote that isn't actually true. And I've had people fight me on this time and time again. And you know what? One person was actually so adamant that this was a real quote that they actually tracked the quote down. And they said, I see it. It appears in this book right here. It was actually a book of poetry that was published in 2017. And it was actually they found the quote on the internet and they published it in their book of poetry. And so because this person said, well, I found it in a book, so now it must be true. Guess what? It is not a history book. It is not a textbook. It is not a book about Martin Luther King. It's published in a book of poetry, and somebody heard the quote. They saw it online. They thought that it was a great quote. They included it. They attributed it to Dr. King. And so now this person has decided that it's true because it's in a book. I've got bad news for you. Ben Shapiro has written books. Rush Limbaugh has written books. Just because something appears in a book doesn't make it real. It doesn't make it true. Dr. King never actually said these things about other animals. Why is this important? Because we use these things in our advocacy. And just like somebody actually commented, and I'm really glad that they said that, you know what, I'm undermining your trust. That is why it's important. That's why this matters. Because when we promote disinformation, no matter how much we feel like it serves our agenda to do so, we're undermining the truth. That is real. And that's a problem. Because if we are actually undermining the truth, if we're actually diminishing the truth by spreading things that are not true, by sharing things that are actually lies, it undermines our credibility as advocates, as people who are supposed to be advocates and ambassadors for truth and integrity. And is that who we want to be? Is that who we want to be as advocates? And I don't think so, because in the service of liberation, in the service of Black liberation, in animal liberation, liberation can't be built on a foundation of dishonesty and a lack of integrity. So intellectual integrity and and professional integrity and activist integrity are all incredibly important. And we can't hold that integrity. We can't hold the moral high ground when we're actually spreading misinformation and falsehoods, regardless of how well-meaning we think that they are, or how we think that they serve our agenda. So I'm really glad that someone made that comment, because we don't want to do that. And that's why it's so important that we get this right. It's so important. Like if we like, if we say, oh gosh, Janelle or Jeanette, I'm so sorry. Like, yeah, like, we like, it is incredibly frustrating when people do this. It really is incredibly frustrating when we get in these discussions with people and it's like, no, we can't say that. Like, it is like, like we may want to say certain things and it feels good to say it at the time. We might be sticking it to people, but in the long run, it's a harm. It's a material harm that we're committing against ourselves and against other animals who we're supposed to be advocating for. And we don't want to do that because we don't want to be those kinds of people. So let's move on from that. This is the third one, and I'm not going to trick you anymore. I will tell you that, before we get started. So this is the third pop quiz that I'm going to give to you, and just a little bit of context before I drop this one. Let's read what we've got here. This is an article that was actually published in a vegan publication. It was in, I think, April or May of last year. Maybe one or two of you have actually taken this presentation before, so stand down. You don't have to participate in this one. For everyone else who's brand new to this, who hasn't seen this before, this is an article that says Europe's meat consumption has dropped 20% in 3 months. That's the headline on the article. Who wrote this article is completely irrelevant. We don't have to focus on that because it's not about calling people out. It's just about focusing on misinformation and why it's dangerous. And now if we read the first couple of lines of the article, it says, this might be difficult for you to see. Europe's meat consumption dropped by 20% in the space of 2 to 3 months, according to New Zealand red meat sector representative Jeff Grant. Grant is in London, representing New Zealand's red meat industry ahead of Brexit, the UK's exit from the European Union, currently set for October 31st. That deadline has come and gone. Obviously, the UK is still in the European Union. They're facing a crashing out. But oh boy, Carl is already on it. He's like, clickbait title. It's definitely a clickbait title. So now, because my partner and I actually run VGN, which is another vegan news outlet, and both of us are actual journalists who have been trained in journalism, this headline didn't resonate because I'm like, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't meet with or match any of the projections of meat consumption that seem to be going up. All of the projections that we've looked at, for the consumption of meat, especially in Europe, actually seem to be very stable or increasing over the next 10 years. So we're like, what's with this? This seems very fishy, if you will. So the pop quiz for this one: does the story require fact checking or does it require verification? And go ahead, put your comments in. As you're as we're commenting, I'm going to give you a couple of clues. Remember what we said about fact checking. Remember what we said about verification. Verification would require are we trying to reproduce something that actually happened? Were there witnesses there? Does this require geolocation, reverse image search, or things of that nature? Fact checking. Does this require, is there a claim that is being made, and are we adjudicating that claim? And if we are adjudicating that claim, does this require us to go to an expert, a political figure, or an academic? So those are the questions that we're asking. I'm seeing a lot of people saying that this is a fact check. Gold star for the fact check people. You're 100% correct. This does require fact checking. If, however, you said verification, do not feel bad. Why? Because this actually happened at an event. And so you could potentially actually look for firsthand witnesses that attended, do a reverse image search if there were images that exist of this, or do a geolocation. But this requires a fact check for the simple reason that there is a claim that is being made about Europe's consumption of meat, and we need to adjudicate the veracity of that claim, and we're going to do so by talking to experts who have this information. VGN actually followed up on this story. We looked at the video from the conference, and we actually had reached out to Mr. Grant himself because we said, hey, this doesn't seem quite right. What is going on here? So I'll read to you what VGN actually wrote. At the Red Meat Sector Conference 2019, Grant stated there had been a 20% drop, but in a video from the conference, he points out that recent heat waves across Europe are the main reason for the meat consumption decline. Furthermore, Grant admitted in an email that he misspoke in his statement regarding the meat industry across Europe. He said, and the emphasis is added by us at VGN, what I meant to say is that consumption of red meat in some weeks over the last 3 months in the UK has been down 20%. Now, this is all really, really important. This is absolutely fascinating, super important information. So what we have here, and I'll go back to the previous slide, is an article that over 10,000 people shared, over 10,000 vegans and vegetarians shared as a celebration because Europe's meat consumption had dropped by 20% in 3 months. And that absolutely didn't happen. This is pre-pandemic too, by the way. This is pre-pandemic. So this is from last year. And when we actually look at the information, this isn't cause for celebration. This is actually an alarming article, because the reason why there was a drop is because of heat waves. So it wasn't for lack of trying that meat consumption had dropped. People wanted to eat meat. They simply couldn't because there were heat waves across Europe that had caused the drop in meat consumption. And we've got 3 things at play from Grant's quote. What he meant to say is that it was consumption of red meat in some weeks. So it's not all meat. It's not pork. It's not chicken. It's just red meat. It's just one. So it's just one type of meat in some weeks. So this was in certain weeks. It wasn't over a complete 3-month period. It's not like it was just steadily going down, down, down. It was only red meat. It was in certain weeks over the last 3 months. And it was in the UK exclusively. It was in the UK. So instead of Europe-wide, we've got one country in certain weeks started to eat less red meat exclusively. Now, I see people asking in the comments or in the chat, what was the cause of this? In the heat wave, the heat wave actually caused a lot of animals to die off. This is a story actually about climate change. This isn't a celebration. This is actually something incredibly dangerous, because a heat wave actually caused a whole heap of animals to die of heat stroke. And so there was not an availability of red meat, because cows and our bovine friends were actually dropping dead because it was so freaking hot. And so you've got, like I said, this article was shared at the time of our writing over 10,000 times. We printed this article contradicting it. Guess how many shares it got? 300. So you've got over 10,000 people who are celebrating this and believing something that is fundamentally untrue. And the truth of the matter actually hardly got any playtime at all. And when you try to correct this misinformation, people get quite violently angry with you because of that same cognitive dissonance that we were talking about. And so this affects our advocacy. This actually comes into play when when we're having discussions about actually believing things and engaging in our own, actually engaging in our own biases, because we're biased toward having a feel-good story. And when people who are not actually journalists preprint things like this, they're not engaging in journalism. They're actually engaging in sensationalism and basically something that is very akin to simple blogging. And when you have a large enough platform, it doesn't matter whether the things that you say are true or not. It just matters that you are getting the clicks out there. Like Carl was saying, it's a clickbait title. And the consequences of that are very real for animals and for ourselves. And it's incredibly disheartening. Nothing is more disempowering than having to defend the truth. Or to having to sift through things that are obvious falsehoods. And the information that gets misstated. And so the animals are the ones who ultimately lose in the end when we engage in this style of advocacy. So I always want people to share things with a critical eye and have that healthy amount of skepticism, something that says in the back of your mind, that doesn't seem right, before you share something. And always read past the headline. There was actually a study done by the National French Institute and Columbia University. Approximately 60% of people, that's more than half of all people, actually share something based on the headline alone without ever opening the article. So yeah, that's something that a lot of us have done, because we see something, we agree with the headline, or someone else has shared it and they said and we trust our friends to share real information, then we'll also reshare it and we never read it. So that's another very real danger. I'm going to move on. because we still got a like whole bunch of stuff to like cover. I think that, yeah, I've got about like 20 more minutes to get through. And I hope that you all are not like completely dying or falling asleep here. I want to talk about false context really quickly. This was an image from May of this year, as a matter of fact, at the height of the Black Lives Matter protests. Thank you all again for like participating in the chat. Like, this image was circulating around social media, and what you're looking at here is like, you know, it's a white man with a lot of like white power and white supremacist symbols that are tattooed all across his torso, and he's being like, you know, he's kind of like staring into like, you know, into a Black woman's face while she is filming him on her iPhone, and it looks like a standoff. This was in Ocala, Florida. And so a lot of people were sharing this image on social media. But like, the reason why we have to have a conversation about false context is because this image doesn't actually represent what a lot of us thought it represented. We thought that this man was staring at this woman menacingly. And that this was like, you know, a very confronting moment that like could have ended in violence. And what's really disappointing to me is that like the body shaming and the body critical comments that a lot of people shared this image with, because they were talking about his quote tits and like, you know, and because he's got a lot of mammary fat on his chest, and people were just like saying all kinds of very unflattering, unkind things about this guy. And the truth of the matter is, like, you know, I was going to ask the question, like, you know, does this photo require fact checking or verification? This actually would require verification, because you would do a reverse image search, but we're not going to do all of that now, because like I don't want to, like, you know, I don't want to like go through like the time that would take. The truth of the matter is that like he actually saw this Black Lives Matter protest in Ocala, Florida, and he took off his shirt and he approached the protesters and he said, "I agree with you, and this is who I used to be," and he wanted people to see like the type of person that he used to be before he actually had a change of heart. So what people interpreted as like, you know, a really racist image actually is an incredibly empowering image. And Jeanette is asking the question, what's a reverse image search? If I had the time, I would actually take you all through a reverse image search right now. But basically, if you've got an image on your computer, you can actually you can go to Google and just type into the Google search bar, reverse image search, or Google, like, you know, Google image search. And you can actually put your image into Google, and Google will tell you where this came from. Carl is saying, I'm a photographer, and that man does not have a threatening body posture or body language. He looks relaxed and is obviously relaxing and posing. I've had thugs attack me while reporting events, and they don't look like that. Thank you, Carl, for saying that. This one, I'm not gonna lie, like this was hard for me to like look at. I thought that it looked suspicious myself when I saw it, because I'm like, this man doesn't look like he's approaching this woman with like menace or like, you know, or maliciously. And so when I actually did do a reverse image search, I saw the story that this came up with. And actually this, like if you do a reverse image search, you can sometimes see this was courtesy of Dave Miller. Dave Miller is the photographer who took this picture, this very powerful, empowering photo. And he does have a Twitter handle. And so you can actually see where this photograph was taken. Again, like citizen journalism, like it's a double-edged sword, because like, you know, people who are professional photographers and people who just have their iPhone are almost on equal footing when it comes to the world of social media. This person who is a photographer who did take this image, like you can track him down and you can see how this image had come to be on the internet and how it was reported in the news. And when I found out the story, it made me feel really bad, because I'm like, people don't have perfect bodies. If you look at my body without any clothes on, you're gonna see I got a belly. I'm kind of soft, even more soft now that I'm sitting here in a pandemic. The quarantine 15 got me. And I'm like, this is the way that we talk about people. People can be racist. But yeah, like let's focus on their racism and let's not focus on their body shaming. Because like what happens is, like, you know, you actually do more harm than good when you're sharing things on social media out of context or with a false context. And like, you know, and saying really mean and unflattering things about people's appearance. And like, I know that people may disagree about, and I'm not perfect either. Like, God knows I body shame like people. If you're racist and you ugly, I'm gonna say that you're ugly. So like, I like, I'm not perfect. Like, what I'm like, I'm not casting stones in a glass house, but this one particularly got to me, and we can all stand to do a little bit better. What does this have to do with animal rights? Let's look at the next image. This is an image also from a Black Lives Matter protest, and this actually was floating around the internet as well. And let's look at the context that this image was shared in. Beautiful police horse injured by rioters. This is like shared by the Facebook page 50 Talent, 50 being like one of the ways that we talk about police. And so like I saw a lot of people who care about animal rights who were actually sharing this image and saying like, oh, like, look at what the protesters have done. Those protesters are evil. They hurt an innocent animal. And you see the weaponization of animals in a racial context. This is what we talk about when we're talking about racialized speciesism. Like there's no, I don't know what actually happened here. I don't know what happened to this horse or how this horse got injured. But what I do know is that this horse had absolutely no business being at a protest. And this horse is being used as a weapon by police officers. The police officers are the ones who endangered horses by bringing them into a situation by exploiting and enslaving them. And I don't know, if there are protesters who are in a place where a 400-pound animal is actually being used to trample on you, and someone actually throws a brick or or some sort of a blunt object at the animal while they're trying to get away, or if you are in an uncontrolled, unsafe situation where there is a lot of panic and mayhem happening, I don't know exactly how that horse got injured. But what I do know is that people who already have preconceived notions about Black Lives Matter and about activists who are protesting in general are going to use this horse or use animals or images of animals and weaponize them in ways that that try to discredit activists. Take the bridle off and and treat the injury, boy. But this is what happens. Not only are animals physically weaponized and physically exploited, but we repurpose that exploitation in images that live forever on the internet by using images of injured animals to diminish activism or to diminish protesters, because people always have a soft spot for animals, of course. We're characterizing what happened to this horse at the hands of quote protesters as abuse, but the actual abuse is the fact that they were used as weapons in the first place, when they're being exploited by the state apparatus itself. Those are examples of false context. Also, I said that we were going to talk a little bit about evaluating sources. This is a story that actually came at the beginning of the pandemic. Swans and dolphins return to the canals of Venice as Italy shut down, leaves water crystal clear and free of tourists. Where did this come from? Newsner. And you see these images. I don't know how many people saw this in the beginning of the pandemic in late March, when people were actually experiencing their first wave of lockdown, and and people were saying, oh my goodness, the dolphins have returned to the Venice canals. This is again another example of false context, because that dolphin and these swans were not actually photographed in Venice. And there were no dolphins in the Venice canals, and people were saying, oh, but the canals are so clear, and because we're staying home, the earth is healing and we are the virus. That was something that we heard time and time again. That's actually not true. The reason why the canals of Venice were so clear is because there were not gondolas going up and down the canals, stirring up the sediment on the bottom of the canal. The canals were always clear, but you couldn't see down to the bottom, because every time someone is pushing an oar through the canal, that's actually just stirring up the sediment at the bottom. So the sediment just settled, and then you were able to see down to the bottom. It's as simple as that. It's not because we stayed at home for 2 weeks and suddenly the canals had cleared up. That's literally not the way that it works. But we were hardwired to want to have a happy story and want to believe something that was true, even if it didn't happen. And so you've got these heartwarming stories of of swans and dolphins returning to the canals, and that's actually not the way that it went down. I'm going to skip over this story. This was also a lot of fun, like talking about like Queen Elizabeth. Oh, I'll talk about it very briefly. Queen Elizabeth was supposed to celebrate her 94th birthday with vegan food. This was from April 20th. Again, it was a vegan news outlet. And so, like, you know, it's perfect lockdown food. Happy birthday, Your Majesty, says PETA, the animal rights organization, sent Queen Elizabeth a vegan steak and pie, and it was made by the tinned pie company Frey Bentos, of which, like, you know, a company of which the Queen is reportedly very fond of. Why is this a problem? I'll tell you why this is a problem. This is a particular bugaboo for me, because it actually doesn't say anything. Basically, this article is just like, you know, it's a circle jerk. And I know that that's going to be really unpopular to say, but it just needs to be said. The bottom line is, like, nobody, like, you're not going to send a pie in the mail to the Queen of England and expect that it's ever actually going to get to her. Somebody found that pie and they threw it in the trash as soon as it got to the freaking palace. The Queen never saw this pie and probably didn't even know that the pie existed. But the fact that they sent the pie, the fact that PETA sent a pie to the castle, allows us to write a story and say that the Queen celebrated her 94th birthday with vegan food when she most certainly did not. Why is this a material harm to animal rights and to animal liberation? Because we just wrote this article that is completely misleading, totally untrue, just so that we can pat ourselves on the back. And this is what we call virtue signaling. This is what we, like, you know, this is what we've been reduced to. Like, nobody actually believes this to be true, except for a handful of vegans who all wanted to just sit and pat ourselves on the back and congratulate ourselves and somehow believe that the Queen of England is eating vegan food when that's absolutely not what happened. PETA, like, you know what, love them or hate them, actually came up with this publicity stunt that was popular with no one other than a bunch of vegans. Like, we all shared this article and we're just losing our collective shit over, like, the fact that, like, the Queen herself was eating vegan food when she most certainly was not. Like, that's absurd to believe that, like, we're just, like, the Queen of England doesn't eat food that came to her in the mail. Like, that's just not something that ever happens. So yeah, like, she's not that stupid. Like, so, like, yeah, like, she's only eating things that came out of her own kitchen that were prepared by her own chefs. So, like, a male pie, first of all, I would definitely eat male pie because I am poor. So, like, you can definitely believe that if you mail something to me, I'm probably going to eat it. You can definitely poison me. I'm not even going to lie. The Queen of England, however, not so much. But, like, this is a danger because it promotes the idea that we're actually doing something when we're not doing anything at all. It makes us feel good. And, like, that we have to be particularly careful about, like, doing things that just make us feel good about ourselves. Because it doesn't actually move the needle at all for animal liberation. And so, like, you know, and that happens an awful lot. They're just publicity stunts. They're just things that, like, make us feel good, or, like, you know, or that are super sensationalized. And, like, real newspapers aren't sharing this. Like, the Guardian isn't going to go out and write an article about this. The New York Times is not. They don't care that, like, PETA mailed the Queen of England a pie. This is just being shared by vegan outlets, and, like, you know, and it's being shared around in our own, like, little closed circle jerk. So once again, this isn't real. This is imaginary. This is just, like, you know, this is feel good puff that gets, like, shared in our own filter bubbles, and then we think that, like, the larger world is actually paying attention to it, and they aren't. They just aren't. So that is why I say that it's a material harm. So I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and then I did. I talked about it for like 5 whole minutes. So I'm a piece of jerk. So, like, you know, whatever. And don't feel bad about this. Definitely, like, you know what, if people feel naive about these things, that's why we're doing this presentation. That's why we're doing this, because we just don't know. We don't know about a lot of these things. I didn't know. At the beginning of my journey, I would have believed this. I would have said, like, oh my God, look at how great we're doing out there in the world. But that was like 10 years ago, and I was full of, like, you know, I was full of so much hope and, like, you know, and good cheer. That's been crushed out of me, by the way, don't worry. Like, here's another really great story. Like, you know, this comes from Scoop Whoop. That should already tell you a lot about the source right there. It's called Scoop Whoop. But, like, you probably saw this story sometime at the beginning of the pandemic too, when we were all really desperate for good news. A group of elephants had gotten drunk. Like, a herd of elephants found a barrel of wine, had a little party, and got pissed drunk, and then passed out while the humans around them were on house arrest. So this was like a story about a group of elephants that went into, like, you know, a garden in China. They got into the alcohol and, like, you know, they got drunk, they had a good time, and then they fell asleep in the garden. That actually didn't happen. once again, we evaluate the source of this. Like where, like, let's take this apart. If I were actually in the classroom, because we do teach about these things, we would actually like, let's follow some of the hyperlinks. The tweet doesn't really get us very far, but like the Scoop article actually does have a reference that refers us to like a Medium article. So the original source of this was a Medium article written by someone called Kaustuv. So let's look at like the profile of Kaustuv. Like, like this says, like this is a repeat of the article itself. While humans carry out social distancing, group of elephants broke into a village in Yunnan province looking for corn and other food, ended up drinking 30 kilos of corn wine, got so drunk that they fell asleep in a nearby tea garden. We at Indie Love work for conservation of these cute animals and help them to coexist with human in harmony. So like, the article from Scoop Whoop actually takes you here to the Medium article, and it's written by Kaustuv, who apparently works for a company called Indie Love. So let's click on Kaustuv's like Medium profile and see where it takes us there. Kaustuv, like you don't see an actual photograph of a person. Kaustuv's profile or avatar photo is a pair of spectacles and a teacup. Kaustuv's profile says crazy about startups and tickling with my own always, entrepreneur, speaker, conservation, enthusiastic environmental lover, ideator, and sustainable life. And then it's got a link to the Indie Love website. So let's go to Indie Love and find out what Indie Love is. Indie Love is a for-profit social organization working towards sustainable coexistence of humans and wildlife in fringe areas of the wild. So you've got this article, and it's loosely called an article, like with a photograph of elephants, like an article that is unsubstantiated, didn't actually happen, written by someone who's got a website that, like, when you go to it, is actually selling you something. So thousands of vegans actually shared this article in the beginning of the pandemic, and we've got this feel-good story about a bunch of elephants that got drunk on wine and fell asleep, and that didn't really happen. Like, we were all basically taken in by someone who actually wanted to sell us. Let's see what we've got here. We've got naturally activated tea charcoal, and we've got honey. So we've got someone who's selling us tea and honey, which is not a vegan product, who actually went viral, like, creating like a fake article about elephants getting drunk, which didn't happen, that like loads and loads upon us of like have shared, and they've gotten attention for their like crummy little like non-vegan startup. And like, and so like we look like, we look like we've been taken in by something. So once again, like you've got to follow the threads on these things. And if you're not committed to doing that, then don't share it. That's just like, that's just the bottom line. Because at the end of like, at the end of this long chain of like, of links that we've clicked on, what do we end up with? Well, capitalism. We just ended up with somebody that wanted to sell us something, and it's not even vegan. And we were all like, always check before sharing. Thank you, Charlie, for saying that. Charlie, you're like, you're the gold star pupil in this class today. Like, you're just kicking all kinds of ass here. Like, moving on, this is just an infographic of like most of the major news sources that are out there. This is from Ad Fontes Media. This is actually from 2018. Definitely check out the 2021 because Ad Fontes like updates this very, very frequently. I don't know how well you can see this, or if you are using your mobile device, perhaps you can actually like zoom in. But you see this like grid that is like, separated or segregated into quadrants. The top center quadrant is like the most reliable media that you've got out there. Excuse me. Dead center, not left bias, not right bias, totally neutral. Top green box, you've got Associated Press, Reuters, Bloomberg, NPR, C-SPAN, LA Times, Politico, PBS, ABC, CBS, NBC, The Hill, you've got the Wall Street Journal, surprisingly for some people, Christian Scientist Monitor. NPR and BBC are my favorites too. So like, I'm totally here for that. The Guardian, Washington Post, New York Times, no surprises there really, no surprises there. Then you get into like the yellow quadrant, which actually, like when you look at the key on the far left side, you've got like factual reporting, complex analysis, or a mix of factual reporting and analysis. Still good, because you want factual reporting and analysis. You've got like, like on the to the left of the spectrum, you've got Slate, The Daily Beast, Vox. You've got Vanity Fair, Mother Jones, Mike.com. And to the right of that, and I definitely encourage people to read things that are to the right of center. Like definitely read The Economist, National Review, The Weekly Standard. You've got FP, or excuse me, FT, Financial Times, Forbes. Like mix up your media. Don't just like do things that are exclusively left, or in my situation, far left. But always, always avoid the things that are at the bottom of the spectrum that are on the far left or far right. On the far left, like, boy, oh boy, I see people sharing stuff from Bipartisan Report, Palmer Report, Patriotics, Wonket, Alternet, Daily Cause. Not good. That's not good. Not so factual, high on the propaganda scale. And on the far right, or as we like to call it, the alt-right, you've got Gateway Pundit, Breitbart, InfoWars with like Rush Limbaugh is like, it's literally the bottom of the barrel. The Daily Mail, the New York Post, Fox News, my goodness gracious, and the Daily Wire. These are like, and the Daily Caller too. These are like, these are just really, stay away from those news sources. And I see people still sharing them to this day, and it irks my soul. So avoid it at all costs. And this is the last thing that we're gonna do. I'm gonna if you all have 5 more minutes for me. This is the point during if we were having a live class, I would actually tell other people to take this article and evaluate it for me. But we're not going to do that. I'm just going to walk you through it. Let's look at this. This is an article from a website called Law Enforcement Today. Now, this is important because there are a lot of alternative websites masquerading as legitimate news sources out there, and this is one of them. And I actually saw this about 2 months ago because it was making the rounds again. And the reason why this is important is because once more, like I said earlier, as with the horse, people actually weaponize or exploit animals in a variety of ways. We don't just we think of animal exploitation as something that is inherently physical, but animal exploitation comes in a lot of different ways. And in the case of racialized speciesism, people actually exploit animals online by way of sharing animal abuse stories to delegitimize peaceful protest. Or protest that is overwhelmingly peaceful. The New York Times has reported that over 95% of Black Lives Matter protests since its inception have been entirely peaceful, which means that only 5% of protests have turned violent or or have resulted in violence. And yet the violent protest is what people focus on. Why? Because of unexamined anti-Blackness. That's the reality of it. So people amplify these stories online because it feeds their already existing biases against Black and brown people. And it shows people, aha, these protesters are evil. Why? Because they hurt animals. The media trope of people who hurt animals are bad is something that we see over and over again. I'm not going to get into the use of media tropes because that's another presentation, and I'll totally geek out about media theory in another time. But the media trope of people oh, Charlie is asking me to speak more about racialized speciesism. We'll come back to that. But the media trope of bad people hurt animals is very real, and people use that all the time. So on this website, Law Enforcement Today, which should give you an idea of the context in which this article is being shared, and the type of website that it is. Portland police rescue a pig set to be slaughtered by rioters. They were trying to send a message to cops. This is posted by the author is Chris Elliott, August 3rd. So let's look at this. Let's see, let's look at the website Media Bias Fact Check. Always check this website. It is an excellent resource. Media Bias Fact Check. How do they rate law enforcement today? You see this arrow in the middle of the screen? On the blue side, that's the far left bias. And to the on the right red side, to the far right, that's extreme right bias. And you see the level of factual reporting on law enforcement today is rated as mixed at best. And do you see where the where the dot is, that yellow dot? It is so far to the right of the scale that it's about to fall off the arrow altogether. So this is extreme alt-right bias from law enforcement today. Let's look at the detailed analysis. right bias from law enforcement today. Like these media sources are moderately to strongly biased toward conservative causes through story selection and or political affiliation. They utilize strong loaded words, wording that attempts to influence an audience by using appeal to emotion or stereotypes. They publish misleading reports and omit reporting of information that may damage conservative causes. Some sources in this category may be untrustworthy. Overall, we rate law enforcement today far-right biased based on story selection and editorial positions that align with the conservative right. We also rate them mixed for factual reporting due to the use of poor sources, lack of transparency, and failed fact checks. So this website is not trustworthy. If you see people sharing something from like a website like that, definitely step in. So yeah, like looking at the detailed report, there's like so much more information here. But yeah, like you see that like it's got failed fact checks. You see the like who it's funded by, the analysis and the bias of it. Like and like there's so much information that can be gained by going to that website, Media Bias Fact Check. Check it out. Check it out. So that's the source that we're using for this article, talking about how like, and let's look at again at that headline. Like Portland police rescue pigs set to be slaughtered by rioters. They were trying to send a message to cops. And so you see this image here, a police officer with this rescued pig. And so it's a happy image. The officers have rescued this pig from the horrible rioters that were going to kill them. Then you just like actually do a simple Google search. Like this is my Google search when I actually look for Portland pig rioters. And you can see in the search bar, that's what I typed in. And this is the first page of results that comes up. The very first article actually comes from the Oregonian newspaper. Protesters found and comforted pig in blanket along Willamette, along the Willamette River. This is from the Oregonian. This is like, this is the actual news story as reported by an actual newspaper. Protesters found and comforted a pig in a blanket, then flagged down the Portland police for help. That is the actual article. Now, how do we feel about the Oregonian? Like, again, like if we were in a classroom, I'd ask someone to to look this up while we were actually reading the article and then read to us what you find out from Media Bias Fact Check. But we'll do that ourselves a little later. This is from the article. This is Officer Hopsberger said the Bureau and members of the public worked Sunday morning to find Betty. They named the pig Betty, safe shelter. Betty has found a home at a local animal farm where they will take good care of her. The pig apparently had been abandoned sometime overnight. Several people who had noticed the pig gently covered it with their own orange blanket and jackets and contacted Mary McDonald Lewis, an animal rights activist. McDonald Lewis said she received a call about midnight to help with the estimated 300-pound swine found along the East Bank Esplanade. These wonderful folks who had been out protesting all evening were taking care of the pig as she lay sleeping in a planter bed along the Willamette River, she wrote in an email. So instead of protesters, like these horrible, violent protesters actually going to kill a pig, and the officers, thankfully, they stepped in and rescued the pig, we actually learned that these wonderful folks who were protesting all night were taking care of the pig. And so that's that's the story as reported by the Oregonian. So let's look at the Media Bias Fact Check here for the Oregonian and find out where they reside. This is actually slightly right of center. So you still got a right of center, a local newspaper who is ranked high on factual reporting. So you've got so even with a right center bias, it's still a center bias, or more central than bias with high factual reporting. And that's the Oregonian. So which one of these stories are we going to believe here? Which one of these stories are we actually going to go with? And it's not the story from law enforcement today. Which of the stories actually got shared more? Well, it was the story from law enforcement today. Why? Because it feeds the negative emotional biases that we have against people that are actually protesting extrajudicial violence against Black and Brown United States citizens. And here again is the detailed report for the Oregonian. You see who it's funded by, you see their history, the analysis and bias that they've got, and why we would trust this news source over another one. We're just going to wrap up here. I'm not going to force you all to do homework and talk about how we come to this evaluation. I'm not going to have someone do a reverse image search because that would be too difficult to do here, like, you know, in an online forum where we've only got like 90 minutes to spend together. I'm just going to wrap up by telling you all one of the things that I wanted to like get across that we didn't address here is that there's no such thing as fake news. There's no such thing as fake news. There's either news or not news. The term fake news actually came into popularity in around 2015, 2016, and it came to popularity because of Donald Trump. Why? Because anything that he didn't like, he was able to label it fake news. And when you're actually in the world of journalism, you learn not to use the phrase fake news because it legitimizes the idea that news in any capacity can be fake. And there's no such thing as fake news. It's either news or it's not. And so we refrain from, and always tell other people to refrain from using the phrase fake news, because every time we say it, we give it more life. It's like Tinkerbell. If we believe in it, then it will be real. But if we take away its power by not talking about it in terms of news being fake, then we can absolutely reclaim actual journalism and reclaim like fact from fiction. The last thing that I just wanted to say, this is like, you know, Marla Rose, if any of you follow Vegan Street, Marla and her husband, John, actually have run Vegan Street for like, God knows, centuries. Like she said her son had come up with a great quote that I think is absolutely hilarious. Be skeptical. Skepticism is like coleslaw. It's great to balance out the plate, but you don't want to make a meal out of it. Be skeptical, but don't be overly skeptical because that's too dangerous. So like, you know, and like, you know, like eat coleslaw, but don't make coleslaw the whole meal. That's disgusting. That's disgusting. And if you're the type of person that wants to eat coleslaw all the time, then we can't be friends. Delete me on Facebook and get my number out of your phone. Thanks all of you for attending this presentation. I'm going to turn and I am going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to read all of the wonderful comments that have come in. I see Kevin is back. Oh, night has fallen in Florida. It is gorgeous behind you right now. I'm in Central Europe, so it's super late for me.
Oh wow.
But
okay.
like, yeah, but it is gorgeous there. You're wearing a t-shirt. You're no longer wearing your amazing shades. But yeah, like, thank you so much for having me, and like, thanks for everyone who attended.
Thank you so much, Christopher, for the presentation. It was so incredibly informative and educational for myself. I'm sure for everyone that attended. My partner is a biologist, and since we met, she is always telling me to research my research. And so for the last 5 years, I've been doing so. I've been trying to make sure I know where all of my sources are coming from, know who's funding the research that I am reading for myself, especially if I'm sharing it with other people, sharing it online. I want to make sure that it's that it is legitimate and that it is coming from a reputable source. I certainly learned a lot. Thank you so very much for everything. I just wanted to remind everybody as well that tomorrow, as well as Sunday at 12 p.m. on both days, we have 2 more live webinars. Tomorrow at noon, it's going to be Dr. Neil Bernard. And on Sunday at noon as well, it's going to be Carol Adams. You can register. Yeah, I know it's going to be super exciting. We're very excited for it. You can register online at cfvegfest.org/webinars. They're both free. We encourage you to register for both of them. And also I just wanted to say, Christopher, that we were creating a Patreon for ourselves, and so we were looking at yours to kind of figure out how to do it, what kind of looks right. If we wanted to support you, is Patreon sort of the best way that we could go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Tell everyone, please support me on Patreon. Like, your Patreon subscriptions don't just help us because that's what keeps VGN running. We have a goal of getting to 3,000, but we also have like a commitment to mutual aid. And so like every month, number one, we have a standing donation like that, like $100 of our Patreon actually goes to the Nepal project that is run by Apple Umali. And she actually has been feeding the street dogs in Nepal. But we also have like a running commitment to help other organizations as well. So like this month we are helping Food Empowerment Project. And like we've also given money to like indigenous animals in Australia after the wildfires. We've done a lot of amazing stuff this year, and it's all because of the Patreon community that we've got. So like, yes, please definitely support us if you are so inclined. And if you're not inclined, we still give away a ton of free content, and VGN is always free.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher, again for the presentation. Like I said, it was really, really informative and just super valuable. So thank you to everyone that participated, and we hope to see you tomorrow and Sunday.
Definitely Sunday. I'm going to be there.
Oh, and also one last thing, Christopher, is it okay if we share your presentation?
Yes, absolutely. It's been
Okay.
recorded, as shiny and sweaty as I am, but like you only see me here for like 3 minutes of it, and then we like go into the actual presentation proper. So yes.
Awesome. Very cool. Thank you again, and have a great night, everybody.
Thanks all of you for coming. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to like everyone who like invited me. Like get Larry if you're out
Whoops.
there. You've been amazing. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, guys. Have a great night. See you tomorrow.